Welcome to the Codcast from CommonWealth Magazine. I'm Michael Jonas. There has been a lot of talk in this era of criminal justice reform about how people get caught in the legal system, sometimes starting with fairly minor crimes and then spiraling downward from there. Some reform-minded district attorneys, including Suffolk County DA Rachael Rollins, have said they will increasingly be looking not to prosecute some of these lower-level crimes. They argue that will be better in the long run for those individuals and for the communities where they live. Other prosecutors and public safety officials say that's a dangerous path to take, one that will lead to more crime and make communities less safe. A group of researchers recently decided this was an important question to try to answer. They set out to do just that using court data from here in Suffolk County, which is made up of Boston, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop. So what did they find?
What we found was that in Suffolk County, a nonviolent misdemeanor defendant who, just by the luck of the draw, had his case not prosecuted instead of being prosecuted, that defendant was much less likely to be rearrested subsequently within the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. And just to give you a sense of what those magnitudes are, a nonviolent misdemeanor defendant was about 69% overall, had fewer rearrests within 2 years. And that meant about 65% fewer misdemeanor arrests and about 75% fewer felony arrests. So these downstream effects, we saw them not only for misdemeanor offenses, but also for felony offenses. And the other thing we found was that these effects were largest for first-time defendants who hadn't been in the criminal justice system before. So the beneficial effects for defendants of not being prosecuted seemed to be the largest for people who hadn't already built up a record in the criminal justice system.
That's Anna Harvey. She is director of the Public Safety Lab at New York University, a research center that tries to answer these sorts of questions through rigorous analysis of data.
Our primary findings come from the period before District Attorney Rachael Rollins took office. So we're looking at a period spanning 2004 to 2018. And in Suffolk County, like in many large urban jurisdictions, misdemeanor complaints, when they come in, they're assigned to arraignment courtrooms by the courts. And there are assistant district attorneys who are assigned to arraignment courtrooms by the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office without regard to and without knowing which particular cases are going to be heard in that courtroom on that day. The other thing we need, and that is the case, is that those ADAs vary in how lenient they are with these cases. So some ADAs are going to prosecute just about everything, and some are going to offer non-prosecution more frequently. So for a defendant, it really is like the luck of the draw. Do you get a more or a less lenient ADA? And that's what we're leveraging to get that, what we call as if random prosecution or non-prosecution.
And so what do you and your colleagues think is going on here? Why do you think not prosecuting these cases is apparently having this beneficial effect on future behavior of these folks? And I guess, at least part of the idea of the criminal justice system, we've been told, is that, prosecution and punishment will be a deterrent to future criminal activity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there have been some studies that have found that kind of deterrent effect in certain kinds of contexts. So traffic tickets, speeding tickets is a case where actually people have found a deterrent effect. You slow down after you've gotten a ticket. But misdemeanor prosecution, a misdemeanor is different from a traffic ticket. It comes with several collateral consequences, one of the most important of which is that in Massachusetts, if you are charged, if there's a complaint that's brought against you, even just for a misdemeanor offense, and your case is arraigned, it's not dismissed prior to arraignment, you now have a criminal record of arrest that goes on your criminal record with a statewide CJIS database. And that criminal record is observable by some employers, depending on what kind of jobs you're applying to, and it's observable by law enforcement actors. And so you can't, it starts this path of consequences for defendants, we think. There have been other studies that have found that criminal records have these really negative, deleterious effects for individuals who are trying to get legal work. And it can, send some people into other means of trying to find income if they aren't able to get legal work.
And so I guess the sort of flip side of that is this presumption that the folks who weren't sent down that road and didn't have their cases pursued, had an easier time sort of staying on the straight and narrow, you might say, and not finding their way into the criminal system again. And I guess the thing that I was most interested in was your observation that these effects that you saw of not prosecuting were strongest for first-time offenders. What is that saying to you?
Well, we have this phrase we use. It's called the garden of forking paths. So, which is really about the cumulative consequences of the things that happened to you earlier in your life. So imagine a garden, like a really big garden, and it has, a path that starts and the path keeps forking. If you keep taking the fork to the left, after 4 or 5 forks, it's really hard to get back over to the right side of the garden. But if you start off taking the right fork, now you're being pointed in a different direction. And it's kind of like, and that's one thing that we think a criminal record, even just of arrest, we're not even talking about criminal records of convictions for the most part, because only about 25% of these cases end in conviction. But they're all getting criminal records of arrest. And once your record isn't clean anymore, then it makes it a little bit harder the next time you have an encounter with a law enforcement agent to not accumulate another arrest. And now maybe you're more likely to be convicted. And that starts having consequences for employment. Employers who have the choice of hiring somebody who has a perfectly clean criminal record and somebody who doesn't, it's not too hard to figure out who they're going to hire. So, keeping somebody, off of that chain of forking paths, we think is really has a big impact.
And the bulk of your study looked at, as you said, at this 15-year period before Rachael Rollins became district attorney. Now she's made this idea of not pursuing some of these lower-level cases an explicit part of her agenda. And what did you find was the impact of this during the short time since she's been in office that you and your colleagues were also able to look at?
Yeah, so we did look at the transition. We looked at nonviolent misdemeanor cases that came before the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office in 2017, 2018, and then the transition to District Attorney Rollins in January of 2019. And so we did find, and we again threw our statistical toolkit at it, and we found that even controlling for, court and month and day of the week and case and defendant characteristics, there was, not surprisingly, an increase in non-prosecution after district attorney took office by about 15%. And those cases that were not prosecuted because of the transition to a new district attorney, we also found reductions in subsequent offenses for those defendants within a 1-year period after their case had been arraigned. So, and the effects were of similar magnitude. So we found that District Attorney Rollins' policy was having a similar effect to what we were seeing in our other study.
What do we know about how this non-prosecution of cases affects or affected crime rates in Suffolk County? I guess people might think the defendants who are not prosecuted might have lower rates of committing crime, but it's possible also maybe they just weren't being arrested because there was a sense that among police or others that they weren't going to face prosecution anyway, or also maybe they weren't committing crimes, but certainly in this more recent period after Rollins and her policy became, got so much attention that maybe other folks were sort of seeing this as an opportunity. They were emboldened by this idea that there wasn't going to be prosecution to commit some of these crimes like shoplifting or drug possession that we're hearing are not getting prosecuted.
Yeah, no, we were certainly concerned about that as well. So we took reported crime incidents from the Boston Police Department. And again, using the same tools that we used to look at the increase in non-prosecution between the 2017 and 18 period and 2019. We used the exact same toolkit and looked at reported crime rates across a variety of different kinds of categories of reported crime. And we couldn't find any effects in the sense that crime rates either stayed flat or actually decreased in that initial period of 2019. So while we agree that that is a concern that one might have, we were able to look at it empirically, and we couldn't find any evidence that it was actually occurring.
Can you talk a little just about getting access to this data and the fact that you and your colleagues landed here in Suffolk County to do the study?
Yeah, well, in 2018, I had already started to talk to district attorneys' offices about wanting to evaluate the effect of some of these new non-prosecution policies. So I live in New York City, and so the Manhattan district attorney, the Brooklyn district attorney had been experimenting with these policies. And, the staff in those offices expressed interest, but they were really hesitant about sharing their data because they didn't know what the results would show. Right. And they were worried that what if the results of the study came back and it showed that, in fact, non-prosecution was endangering public safety, and they didn't want to be responsible for that. And so I was introduced to Rachael and in late 2018 after she had won the election, and she suggested that I come up to Boston to visit her in about just a couple of weeks after she took office. And we had the most extraordinary conversation in which she said, I want to know the truth about what effects these policies will have. And I don't want you to sugarcoat it. I want you to give it to me straight. I'm going to give you full access to our data. And I need you to come back and tell me, are these policies harming or helping public safety?
I next had a chance to talk to Suffolk County District Attorney Rachael Rollins about the study and her policy on prosecuting or not prosecuting these lower-level crimes. But first I asked her about the decision to have a study done in the first place. Why did she agree to give researchers access to years of court records that might support her policies or might show they were a bad idea?
Because I'm not afraid of data. I think it's really important that when we propose alternatives or new things, that we are willing to look and see whether they work. And I found that there are people that love speaking about the good old days, but don't have any data to support the good old days, right? And I come from a community where we have not been successful or reaped the benefits of, privilege and opportunity and wealth like many people do in the criminal legal system. So we were going to look at things differently. And I think I had to be open to seeing whether I was right or wrong and adapting appropriately.
And what do you think is the big takeaway from the study findings?
So I think the takeaway is that there are other ways that we can think about safety, and prosecuting every single crime, nonviolent, non-serious crimes, wasting 70 to 80% of, let's say, the criminal defense bar, the public CPCS office, public defenders with Anthony Benedetti, 70 or so percent of their budget is on the misdemeanors or the municipal and district court cases, as opposed to the part one violent, serious crimes that we know are driving violence in our communities. Let's just be more fiscally responsible and be smarter on crime. That's number one. And number two, we are not going to wait another 16 years to then allow more people access to our data. We are going to be in real time looking at this, Michael. And what I did as the DA when I was first elected was we hired a chief of innovation and strategy and a data technologist that work internally in my office. And we are looking at data all the time. The head of my Crime Strategies Bureau used to work in the office, went to work for TJX, doing a lot of data analysis regarding, corporate sort of crimes and preventing those proactively with data. And we lured him back, and he's now using data to help us proactively prevent crime.
And then, of course, the other part of this story is what, or the sort of main part that the researchers told was what happened to the individuals who were either prosecuted or not prosecuted. And what do you sort of take away from that? Were you surprised at the kind of dramatically lower level of future involvement in the court system with the justice system over the following couple of years of those who were not prosecuted? We keep hearing, prosecution and convicting people of crimes is supposed to be a deterrent, but it sort of seemed to be in these data kind of flipped on its head.
Yeah, and I was deeply saddened by the randomness of it all, right? If you got Assistant District Attorney Jonas, who was, more culturally competent maybe, or understood and saw you as a full human being, as the mosaic of your life, as opposed to just this snapshot of who you are in this moment. Remember, Michael, we have in our municipal and district courts, so many of those people have substance use disorders, mental health or mental illness issues. They have food or housing insecurity. There are all of these issues that they are dealing with that are far more, relevant to why we find them in the system than the very little thing that they've done, the nonviolent or non-serious crime. And so I didn't like the randomness of the ADA that was willing to give you another chance and not brand you with a criminal record, as opposed to the person that just said every time we arraign every single case. And then, most people with a nonviolent, non-serious crime, when you get arrested or you get charged with a crime, it is serious and it deeply impacts you. And whether that's your rock bottom, even if it's a trespass, even if it's a driving with a suspended license, even if it's a possession, right? That might be enough to jar you to say, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I don't want to do this any longer. Today's the day that I'm going to get the help I need, etc. So that's what I was interested in. And what we saw definitively dating back to 2004, over 16 years of data, 67,000 cases, is the people that we branded with a criminal record came back more. Like the recidivism rate was higher significantly than the ones that we didn't.
And it seems, though, that it also kind of starts this sort of downward spiral, I guess you might say, that the folks who had those arraignments, who had to go through the 5 or 8 or 6 or 10 months of court appearances, even for this low-level offense, they just became much more likely to then commit another offense. Again, I think, as you say, the researchers didn't have the kind of bandwidth or wherewithal to know why, but there's certainly a lot of research and discussion now about how people kind of get dragged into the system and then find it hard. They've got a record that starts to affect their employment abilities, even their ability to maintain employment during the disposition of the case starts to send people a message that maybe this kind of staying on the straight and narrow isn't really going to work for me, and they just start deviating in ways that the others didn't. I guess one thing I'd love to hear you talk about is there's been a lot of talk, as you know better than anyone, about your plan to not prosecute this list of 15 nonviolent offenses. And I guess what the study showed, I think, is that your office has, in fact, increased the share of these cases that are not prosecuted, but it has not been kind of a wholesale turning upside down of the way business is done in Suffolk County. In fact, they say that more than 1 in 3 of these cases already was not being prosecuted under your predecessor, Dan Conley. I know there's different ways to measure it, but the way they looked at this set of either cases on your list or a somewhat broader group of nonviolent misdemeanors, that roughly, they said 34 to 38% of them were not being prosecuted already in 2018, and that under your first just 8 months in office, that bumped up by 5 to 8 percentage points. So you haven't really just wholesale stopped prosecuting these 15 charges. Talk a little about that. And I don't know, do you think was your messaging initially off when people thought it's going to be open season on all these things? Did you recalibrate things?
So I think you're right. I mean, to go back to one question before, just the collateral consequences that we see when you have a court date and you are given all of these additional conditions, then it's more rope that you can tangle yourself in, right? If you are 10 minutes late to a curfew as a result of getting back from your job, and then additionally with the brand of an arraignment, you might not be able to get, or an open case, into a program for your substance use disorder. You have fines and fees. So there are all these other ways that we can tangle you up. So, but moving on to that question, the new one. As a candidate, Michael, I didn't have a comms team, right? So in all bold on my one page 6 weeks before the primary election, I wrote, decline to prosecute list, right? Or
I remember it.
And then in small, almost one font, invisible ink, I said, unless you get permission from a supervisor, right? I think doing it now with my comms team, I might have worded that a little different, but what I can tell you is we just flipped the presumption from prosecution, which is what people thought was happening, to declination, diversion, and dismissal. You've already hit the nail on the head in that my predecessor was declining significant amounts of these cases on my list of 15. He didn't have a list of 15, but we can look at that list and go back in the data and show, I think in 2018, we dismissed, declined, or diverted 42% of the things that were on my decline to prosecute list under DA Conley. He just didn't tell you. I don't want to fool you into this. And I also don't want only the kids in West Roxbury to reap the benefit of dismissed, declined, and diverted, or Southie or Charlestown. I want all kids or young adults or people. I'm not dragging you down to our floor. I'm lifting the floor up to the ceiling, and I'm putting it in writing so that everyone reaps the benefit of this. So 2018, dismissed, declined, diverted, 42% of the decline to prosecute list. 2019, dismissed, declined, or diverted, 57%. So that data shows me a few things. Yes, I increased it a bit, but most people, the misconception is it went from 0 to 57. It didn't.
Or maybe they thought it went from 0 to 100, right?
0 to 100, right? And that's my second point is with 57%, that means in 43% of the cases, we prosecuted because these are just guideposts, right? If Michael Jonas, this is the first time you've ever touched the criminal legal system and you have a trespass, why do I want to brand you with a criminal record? I'm going to null pros you and say, hey, knock it off. Don't do this again. As opposed to Rachael Rollins, where this is my 7th trespass in the last 4 months. We've tried this and it's not working for Rachael. We're going to arraign her and the judge is going to help us now hold Rachael accountable with more resources and probation and all of these other entities that jump in after the arraignment. That's the way we're thinking about this. And at the end, Michael, the most important piece is nobody's saying I don't think trespass is important. But if Rachael is trespassing because she's homeless or she has a mental health issue, let's get her housing and treatment so that we just eliminate the problem writ large, right? As opposed to putting a Band-Aid on it, sending her to South Bay, and it's $55,000 a year to send someone there. Let's use that money to get some housing and treatment for the people that are hurting in our communities. And let's put our attention on the violent, serious crimes that are happening in the communities. The rapes, the kidnappings, the child sexual assaults, the homicides, the armed assault with intent to murders. That's what I want to spend my time on.
And have you had conversations since the study results have come out with any of the folks who had been kind of raising alarms about this? There had been some pushback from folks in the police department, police unions. I know even one of your fellow DAs, Michael O'Keefe on Cape Cod, had said this was sort of, everything was going to hell in a handbasket. We have these, he called them social justice district attorneys. And I mean, he wrote a piece saying it would be a big mistake, this idea of declaring that entire categories of crime will go unprosecuted. Again, it sort of seems like you and DA O'Keefe maybe are, I'm not saying that you are in complete agreement, but it doesn't seem like your disagreements were quite as strong or as complete as he was making it out to be. Again, he seemed to be also suggesting that you were going to sort of declare entire categories off limit for prosecution, which would, I think he's right, sort of be kind of an invitation to folks that it's open season on whatever that is. Has there been any, I don't know, meeting of the minds or conversations since this report came out?
I guess my phone not ringing is them calling, but no. And what am I going to do? Call them to say, like, look, see, I told you? No, look, we're just going to be busy continuing to try to keep Suffolk County as safe as possible and to have conversations with people that are willing to think creatively about being smart on crime, as opposed to saying, in 1871, when I first became DA, this is the way we did it, and we're going to keep doing it that way, right? No, I'm not. I haven't reached out. We're happy with the data, and we are not going to shy away from the data. But the most important thing, Michael, is had the data shown something different, had they shown, let's say, a massive spike or increase in, recidivist behavior, if we don't prosecute, we would be adapting right now, right? This is not, yay, I won. This isn't about me. It's about what are we doing to not have more government regulation or involvement in people's lives when they really just need assistance for societal failures and harms, right? Mental health issues, substance use disorder, food and housing insecurity, or homelessness. Let's try to get them that assistance as opposed to more supervision, fines and fees, and weighing and bogging them down in a way that isn't going to have them be successful. So again, I'm not expecting calls from people. I've known them for a little bit of time. That doesn't seem to be a strong suit there, but hey, might happen. We'll see. I'll let you know if I get a bouquet from, where would it be from? I don't know. Some beautiful flower shop, right?
All right. We'll be waiting to hear from that. So, Rachael Rollins, Suffolk County District Attorney, thanks so much for talking with us today. It's been a great conversation. And thanks to you for listening to another episode of the Codcast from here at CommonWealth Magazine. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.